And what we're looking at here this morning, I think, is one of the most famous Bible stories in the entire Bible. When you say that, one of the most popular stories in the Bible, you almost have to put that in air quotes, because the section we're looking at, many people have heard about this particular section of the Bible since they were little kids, right? Maybe we grew up hearing this particular story in Sunday school or in VBS or something like that. So in our collective minds, probably, this story is a kid's story, because that's kind of the context in which we heard it. I don't know about you, but I don't think I can ever remember hearing a message on this section of the Bible growing up. Like, I know the story, but I don't think I've ever heard a message on it. Like not once. I can't remember doing that. So for many of us, it's something we learned as a kid, but we never really revisited as an adult. But there's actually a ton in this little section for us that God wants us to not only know and have the information on as to what happened, to be familiar with it, but God also wants us to be able to interact with it, to be able to wrestle with it a little bit, to be able to learn from it, and to put its lessons into practice in our lives. So we're going to take a look at it together now as adults. What's God wanting us to think about and take action on here? So we're gonna look at it. Here's what it says in Luke chapter 19, beginning of verse 1. It says, Jesus entered Jericho and was passing through, so it wasn't his destination. He's just making his way through Jericho, passing through the area, and as he did, something remarkable happened. It says a man was there by the name of Zacchaeus. He was the chief tax collector, and he was wealthy. And right away, we see here a couple things that are kind of remarkable that we need to stop and make sure we recognize and understand in order to understand what's going to come next here. First of all, we see this guy's name is Zacchaeus. If you look that word up, that's from a Hebrew origin. It means pure and innocent. So our first introduction to this man is by his name. His parents named him Pure and Innocent. And no doubt, right, that was their hope and their prayer for him as a child, that he would grow up to become a good and godly man. That was surely their prayer, that he would be a good and godly man, pure and innocent. But here's the deal. That's not exactly what transpired. That's not who he came. And we know that because next it tells us that he was a tax collector. He was a tax collector. And so, yeah, this guy Zacchaeus, he has actually 4 huge strikes going against him here, if you will. And this is strike 1. He's a tax collector. And like today, the people in that day didn't really like paying their taxes, right? Nobody likes paying their taxes. But back then it was even worse because they were under Roman occupation. And the Roman system of collecting taxes, basically the tax collector could charge whatever he thought he could get away with, right? So they would charge whatever it might be and give to Rome what was due Rome, but then they could keep the extra. So they were just ripping people off left and right. So it was as bad as today, but much worse. They were just robbing people blind. So right away, the fact that he had this job and that he was willing to be able to do this kind of thing meant that he was a pretty bad dude. He was stealing money from people. He was clearly, you might say, a disappointment to his parents. Like, we know that right out of the gate. And we're also told here that he's a chief tax collector. So not only was he engaged in this kind of activity and doing wrong, he was also leading a whole group of people, teaching them how to do this well and so forth. Like, not cool. And he was clearly good at his job because he became very wealthy by ripping people off. So he'd been pulling this scam. Now he's leading a whole bunch of people, dealing in this. Not good at all. And the other background thing, we're not told explicitly here, but if you do a little research on this time period at all, you recognize that there was a lot of Jew-Roman tension kind of stuff going on, right? And so here he is, a Jew, and he's working for the Romans to collect taxes for the Romans. And who's he collecting taxes from? His fellow Jews. So who's he ripping off? His fellow Jews. His neighbors, his friends, his relatives. He's ripping them off to be able to give money to Rome. Like, this is not a win friends and influence people kind of move, right? Like, this is kind of not good. So this is where he was. So clearly here, looking at all these things together, like, were his parents proud of him? No, they were not proud of the path and the lifestyle that their son had chosen. And if we're not too familiar with the Bible, we might expect at this point to be able to see this man just completely run the opposite direction of Jesus, right? Like, if Jesus is coming one way, like, I'm going the other way, right? Because my whole lifestyle, the things that I prioritize, like, all those things are completely different than what Jesus wants. Jesus is coming this way, I'm going that way. I'm out. That's what we might expect. That's what the experts on TikTok might want us to believe, right? That the Bible hates sinners like this guy. Okay. That might be what the TikTok people expect. But what we find by actually reading the Bible is something else altogether, and it's quite remarkable. Take a look with me at verse 3. Notice what it says. It says, he wanted to see who Jesus was. And we got to just pause for a minute and feel that. He wanted to see who Jesus was. This sinner guy who had defrauded his own hometown of money, like that guy is interested in checking Jesus out. Yeah, he wants to know who Jesus is. And he actually goes to some pretty extreme lengths in order to be able to do so. Take a look, because here's the problem he has. It says, because he was short, he could not see over the crowd. So he wants to see Jesus, but he can't because he's too short. How short? Well, here's the deal. You research a little bit on the average heights of the day, and the average height in that area during this time is estimated to be about 5 foot 5 inches. So for comparison, if you know any pop culture references, for comparison, Billy Joel, Bruno Mars, and Kevin Hart are all 5'5". And you heard the little bit of snickering at Kevin Hart, right? Because he's known for being short. He's the butt of a lot of short jokes, and he's 5'5", the average height back then. So this guy was even shorter than the joke we joke about being short today. The dude's short, right? He's like really short. So Zacchaeus there, because he was so short, he ran ahead and he climbed a sycamore tree to see him, to see Jesus, since Jesus was coming that way. So he runs ahead, climbs up in a tree, so he's right in line when Jesus comes by. And we read all this, and we're kind of like, what's the big deal in 2025? Like, it doesn't really matter too much to us. Like, there's nothing really crazy here or outlandish. Short dude wants to see over the crowd, so he runs and climbs up in a tree to be able to see. Like after a big SU game or something, you see the photos of people hanging off lampposts, that they climb up to be able to see over to people. Like, this is not a big deal for us. We don't even think about it. But here's the thing. If you study Jewish culture at all during that time period, you'll discover that for adult men to be able to act in a dignified manner, a respectable way, they would never run. They wouldn't run. Like, not unless they were in combat or the house was on fire or something like that, right? No, there was no running. And there was certainly no climbing trees. There was no climbing trees. Like, these things were considered childish. These were things that children did. It was their type behavior. It was not behavior fitting for adults. So Zacchaeus here, already short, and so very likely the butt of short jokes and childlike stature jokes, he goes and he runs. Like, dude, what are you doing, right? And he climbs a tree, like children do. Like, he has to know that doing these things is just going to pile on more jokes. He has to know that. Like, someone's gonna catch a Coldplay video of him just running and it'll go viral. But Zacchaeus doesn't seem to care. He just wants to see Jesus. So what happens next? We'll take a look at it in verse 5. It says, when Jesus reached the spot, he looked up and he said to him, Zacchaeus, come down immediately. I must stay at your house today. So he came down at once and welcomed him gladly. And again, we look at this, we might not see a whole lot here at first, but there's a couple important things that we need to be able to note. The first is, notice it says, I'm going to stay at your house. Like, this seems kind of weird by today's standards, right? I mean, like, if after church you approach someone here that you don't really know that well, or maybe have never met, and you're like, hey, nice to meet you. I'm coming to your house this afternoon. It's not going to go over too well, right? Like, we don't do that in our culture. Like, what's going on there? That seems kind of weird. It's not cool at all. But here's the deal. Here's what's different here. First of all, this is Jesus, obviously, right? Jesus, who at this point, he is a rather well-known rabbi. So this isn't like two equals talking here. This is Jesus, the famous rabbi, walking through a crowd of people who've come to see him. So that's the context. He's walking through. This whole crowd of people is there to see just him. And he sees this guy that wants to be able to see him, but he couldn't, so he climbed up a tree so he could be able to see Jesus. And he spots that guy up in the tree, and what does he do? The first thing he does is he calls him by name. And that's kind of interesting. It's actually very interesting. Like, if you study this passage at all and you look in commentaries or different theologians talking about this particular passage, every one of them spills a lot of ink on this right here. The fact that Jesus called him by name. He calls him by name. Now, this is interesting, right? Because I mean, it's Jesus, right? So Jesus being God, he knows everyone's name. So that part is true, right? And cool, if you will, and kind of a wild thing here in the scene that probably shocked Zacchaeus. Like all of a sudden he's being called out and Jesus knows my name. Like that's kind of an interesting little scene to be able to picture in your mind. But there's actually something that's bigger that's going on here. The bigger thing here is that Jesus is talking to him and he's not calling him names. He's not calling him names. He's not calling him Shorty. He's not calling him Zacchaeus. Zacchaeus, so Shorty got lost in a Prius. Like there's all kinds of jokes, right, that you could do making fun of this guy for his stature, for his low height, but also for his low stature spiritually, because the dude's not a good dude. He's a sinner for sure, stealing even from his own people. And yet into that plethora of easy jokes or snide remarks about his lifestyle and the much, much sin that he has committed, instead of all that, Jesus calls him by name. He just calls him by his name. And he tells him, I, Jesus, am coming to your house. I'm coming to your house. And that's the difference right there, right? Difference from you inviting yourself over to someone's house. Like you or I, we're like nobodies. But think with me about this. Like if you're a T Swift fan and you can't see her through the crowd, but she spots you and says, I see you, I'm coming to your house today. Right? You're kind of pumped, right? Because greatness has seen you and acknowledged little old you and wants to spend time with you. That's kind of the scene here with Jesus and Zacchaeus. And while Zacchaeus isn't too happy with this, or while Zacchaeus is happy with this rather, the crowd of people, they aren't so happy about this. Check out what the very next verse says. It says, and all the people, they saw this and they began to mutter. They began to mutter, right? Began to mutter, he has gone to be the guest of a sinner. He's gone to be the guest of a sinner. Yeah, you see here, this crowd of Jews saw instantly what we miss when we read this. We see a dude in a tree, we see Jesus call him by name, or like whatever, not a big deal. But this Jewish crowd, they understood exactly what was going on. They spotted it right away. They spotted the fact that Jesus was not only willing to talk to a sinner, a really bad sinner who even stole from his own people. Like Jesus wasn't only willing to talk to that guy, but he was also willing to go to that guy's house and be that guy's guest. Like, think about that. Think about that for a minute. Like, have you ever gone to a restaurant where they have pictures up of like famous people that have come and eaten at the restaurant? You ever seen that? Right? Why do they put up those pictures? Because they want to show you that famous people came to their restaurant and ate their food. Such and such is in my house, right? Ate my food, right? That's what they're wanting to say. But when that famous person is a Ravi Zachariah or a Jeffrey Epstein, yeah, a few pictures get taken down in restaurants. A few pictures get removed from your house. Why? Because while you wanted to be associated with them while they were famous, now not so much. Well, that's what the crowd is making a fuss over here. They're going, why is Jesus giving this man a photo op? Like you don't do that, Jesus. Like, what are you doing? And Jesus, like your status, Jesus, will elevate his status. And he's a loser, Jesus. He's a sinner. He's a betrayer of his own people. And yet you're gonna eat with him? You're gonna be a guest in his home? Yeah, they're really upset about this. In their minds, Zacchaeus had been canceled long ago. They no longer accepted him. You're not a real Jew, blah, blah, blah. They just blew him off altogether. Like, no. And now Jesus shows up, and he waltzes right into this guy's house like nothing, and they're ticked about it. Jesus was messing with the status quo. So that's the scene. Jesus here is at Zacchaeus' house, and the crowd is ticked off, and as they sit and they stew about all this, muttering to themselves, we've all seen that, right? They're muttering to themselves. In the middle of that scene, Zacchaeus himself speaks up. And notice with me here, that this is the first time we hear Zacchaeus himself speak. And what he says is pretty awesome to be able to listen to. Take a look at what he says. He says, but Zacchaeus, he stood up and he said to the Lord, look, Lord, look. And Zacchaeus here, he uses this specific word for Lord here. This specific word means Lord, master, owner, specifically calling out in the title a person who is exercising absolute ownership rights. He's Lord, like Lord of the manor. What does the Lord of the manor own? Everything. The land, the cars, the trees, the buildings. He owns it all. It's his, and he can exercise authority over it. And Zacchaeus here calls Jesus Lord. You are the one who has all authority here and has absolute ownership rights over me. Lord, he calls him. It's interesting. Clearly here, as we're looking at this, we're missing some backstory, right? There's clearly some things happened that aren't recorded for us here because we have lots of questions like how did he get from the guy stealing stuff to all of a sudden he's calling Jesus Lord? You have ownership rights over me. And so like how did he get there? We're not told. However it is that Zacchaeus learned that maybe through a conversation there as they talked, there's maybe a whole afternoon of time, maybe 2, 3, 4 hours where he's talking with Jesus. Like we don't know. We're not told. However it is that he got there though, what we do know is that Zacchaeus is a changed man. He's radically transformed here. Now that he understands who Jesus is and he acknowledges Jesus as Lord, his life has completely changed. And the change is evident in what we see him say next. He says, here and now I give half of my possessions to the poor. And he gives half of his money away to the poor. And let's not skip past this real quickly here. Notice here, he's not making a donation to people or to organizations who can in turn do something for him. That's the way a lot of charitable giving is today, right? We're going to give, I'm so generous, I give to, I scratch your back so you can scratch mine. That's actually the way a lot of that is working. But here he gives to the poor. They can't pay him back. There's nothing they can do to be able to give back. He's just giving to them. Generously giving them, giving half of what he has to him. Half of his wealth, it says. Like, that's a lot. And remember, we're told earlier that he was wealthy, and here he is giving away half of it to those who are poor. So this is a lot of money that's getting pressed out into the community. So this is huge. Though some of us might be a little sarcastic and dark in our thinking here and go, yeah, but he still has the other half, right? Like if he's really rich, he still has the other half. He's doing fine. Like don't get too worked up about this. Well, we might be getting ahead of ourselves a little bit to think that because of what we're told next. Next, Zacchaeus says this, and if I have cheated anybody out of anything, I always love the word if. No, you have. Right? That's not an if, right? And if I have cheated anybody, no, you have. Here's what he says, right? Those people that I've cheated, I will pay back 4 times the amount. I'll pay back 4 times the amount. Like that's a lot, right? He gives away half of his money. He already did that, giving that to the poor. And now out of the half that remains, he's paying everyone back who he's wronged. And that's probably a long list of people, right? So this is pretty huge. And it's interesting because this kind of fits in perfectly with the general principles that are laid down in the Old Testament in the first half of the Bible. There's this idea in the Old Testament of restitution, like where you recognize you did something wrong and you took from somebody, so you're going to pay it back. So if I know I, robbed somebody of $100 and I'm convicted of that and I want to do right by that, I'm going to pay that money back. But if you get caught, okay, you didn't come clean on it, you got caught. You're a thief and you stole something. So if you stole $100, then you have to pay back 2 times that amount. You got to pay back $200. That's the general principle that is there. So it's interesting. Looking at this, and this is the background, this is the Jewish culture, this would have been there, this would have been common knowledge stuff. What does Zacchaeus say? Zacchaeus says, I'm going to double that. I'm going to double the double and pay back all of that. Zacchaeus doing this voluntarily. What we're seeing here is a serious level of transformation. Like Zacchaeus, just a few hours earlier, has a completely different mind and is just looking to steal from those that are around him. You can imagine here now as he says this, the room kind of goes quiet. The room kind of goes quiet. Like you can imagine how it went quiet when Zacchaeus started to say all this. Twitter went silent. TikTok stopped posting about Coldplay. Like everyone went quiet all of a sudden. And they must have started to look at each other like, wait, did you hear what I just heard? Did he just say he's going to pay, and then he's going to pay back double? Like the whole thing went silent. And they're just stunned trying to figure this out. And into that stunned silence, Jesus himself speaks. Jesus says this, Jesus said to him, today salvation has come to this house. And Jesus here, he fills in some gaps for us because there's parts of this story that aren't recorded for us. So we have questions, I have questions. But in this story, Jesus fills in some of the gaps, showing us here that clearly the man understood his sinfulness. Clearly this man turned away from his sinfulness and turned to Jesus and put his faith and trust in Jesus as his Lord. And Zacchaeus here almost immediately takes steps towards living his life in a way that would be pleasing to Jesus. Or said differently, Zacchaeus was radically changed after having come to know Jesus. Like just flat out. Before Jesus, he's living one way, and now he's living in a completely another way. Salvation has come to this house. The repentance is real. There was before Jesus, and now there is after his encounter with Jesus. And he's a radically different person now. And Jesus adds to his statement here with a little poke at the crowd, if you will, the crowd who had rejected Zacchaeus. And Jesus says this, because this man too is a son of Abraham. That's interesting. Because remember, these Jews had rejected Zacchaeus. They had a great respect, these Jews, for Abraham and Moses and so forth, but they judged this man as not being worthy of all that. You're not a real Jew. You're not a real Jew. Not with your behavior and what you're doing, right? You've been stealing, you've been employed by the Romans, you're not a real Jew. But Jesus, he shuts all that down. Says, no, he's just as Jewish as you are and has an equal opportunity to repent as does anyone else. And Zacchaeus repented. And right after that, after all this, Jesus ends with this huge macro type statement, taking this little scenario that had happened with Zacchaeus and enlarging it to be able to show us something massive. Take a look at what he says here. Here's how Jesus ends. He says this, for the Son of Man came to seek and to save the lost. Wow. Think about what's being said here. Why did Jesus come? Why did Jesus step out of heaven? Why did Jesus come to earth? What was he purposing to be able to do? The first thing, he was here to be able to seek the lost, As in, where are the sinners? That's where Jesus wanted to go. Church, hear me? Where did Jesus want to go? Well, where are the sinners? That's where I want to go. I want to go to the sinners. Jesus came because this is where they were. That right there is huge. We'll come back to that in a minute. Secondly, notice that Jesus came to be able to save the lost, it says. He came to save the lost. And this is super interesting because it's very similar to in John 3:17, right after the famous John 3:16. The next verse says this. It says, God did not send his son into the world to condemn the world, but rather to save the world through him. Right. So with that focus, Jesus walked through each day, seeing people as sinners, yes. Like there was no wool being pulled over his eyes. Jesus saw it. No, I get it. I get that they're a sinner, but that's why I came. That's why I'm here in the first place, was to be able to help those very people. Jesus ultimately going to the cross, of course, to be able to take their sin penalty upon himself, so that if they accept it, they might have their sin debt taken care of and be able to enter into a relationship with him. Like that's why Jesus came. So let's stop for a minute and think about this a little bit. This is Jesus, right? This is his heartbeat, his mission, his purpose for coming to earth. So replaying in our minds a little bit here, this scene with Zacchaeus, what do we see? What do we see? We see a dude, Zacchaeus, doing what he could to be able to learn about Jesus. You're like, well, he should have done more, right? There's like study Bibles, there's online courses, like there's all kinds of things he could have done to be able to find out more about, okay. He did what he knew to do. Jesus, I want to get to know, I'm going to climb a tree, I'm going to do what I know to do. He did what he could to be able to learn about Jesus. And Jesus responds. First, Jesus sees him. He just sees him. See, that's not that big a deal. Like he just sees somebody. Is it a big deal? How many of us walk around all day with our heads down, not making eye contact with anybody? How many of us come into church with our heads down, going right to our chair and sit down? We don't make eye contact with anybody. Jesus, head up, eyes up, recognizes, sees people that he loves, sees this sinner guy in a tree. He sees him. And then he acknowledges him by name, calling him by name, not calling him names, calling him by name. And then he goes and he actually spends time with him. And he spends time with him on his own on his own turf, outside of church. Outside of those kinds of situations, he went and spent time with this man. What's the result of this? Zacchaeus got saved. But let's be honest, like if we're bringing this whole situation into 2025, the modern church, not being buildings and whatever, but us, people, the modern church, what's the normal response? Not on the church website, we're so welcoming and whatever. Yeah, right. What's the response of the average church member across America to a Zacchaeus? The average response is, dude, stay in the tree. Just stay in the tree. I don't want to have anything to do with you. We know you. We've heard your reputation. We know what you're into. We don't want to have anything to do with you. I'm just going to keep my head down. I'm just going to walk right on by. You just stay in the tree. That's sadly the response by a lot of people. Is that us, though? Is that us as a church? Is that me? Is that you as an individual? Where we're like, yeah, I see this guy, there's that, but what do I do from there? Do I do anything? Or by my conduct and the way I respond, am I really just telling people to stay in the tree? Like you keep looking for Jesus, man, but you're on your own. And it's interesting to me looking through this situation because this isn't some situation with non-believers at Walmart or something. This is someone who came looking for Jesus. So think with me, bringing that into 2025, someone that's coming looking for Jesus. So like someone comes into church, they're a visitor, they come into church on a Sunday morning, they're here for a reason, they're searching for something. Like think of all that is happening in the world and all the garbage that people are spewing about church and about God and about Jesus and about Christians and all the trash making a person short on reasons to come to church. And yet a person does in desperation, hoping to catch a glimpse of Jesus. They want to know more about Jesus. And in far too many churches, not even one person says hello, let alone acknowledges them by name and actually converses with them. And in the modern church, how many of us ever actually get together with other Christians outside of church that are from our church and so forth, let alone brand new people who they don't yet know? Jesus here with his mission clearly in mind, I have come to seek and to save the lost. But that clearly in mind, he was seeking. He was actively looking for people like Zacchaeus. A sinner? Yeah, absolutely. But he still treated him with dignity and with respect, calling him by name rather than calling him names. And then he engages the man personally and seeks to be able to spend time with him. And in the course of all of that, the man becomes a follower of Jesus, and radically so. Suddenly using his great wealth, not just to pay back those he's wronged, but also to be able to help the poor. The man has been radically transformed. So personalizing all this a bit, I guess I have to ask myself, and maybe you ask yourselves the same questions. I have to ask myself, how many of these folks am I just not seeing because I'm not looking? How many Zacchaeuses are around me each day, but I'm failing to actually see them? Or I see them, but all I really see is their shortcomings and their failures. All I see is their quirks and their blatant sin. And in seeing those things, how often do I simply judge that all as just being wrong? That's so against God, that's so bad. Rather than seeing the wrong and seeing it as a need that I have the solution for in Jesus. What they need is Jesus. They need to encounter Jesus. I wonder what an impact it would make if I didn't let the Gen Z stare bother me. So much written on that, it's hilarious, right? But if I didn't let these cultural kind of whatevers bother me, and instead I just engage people by name and acknowledge them and give them worth by my tone, give them worth by my smile, just being friendly with them, calling them by name, and then inviting them to whatever might be appropriate. The church picnic this afternoon. Have we invited anybody to the church picnic this afternoon? Great opportunity. Or on a regular Sunday, maybe even inviting someone to join you out for lunch somewhere after church or at your house sometime during the week. It's interesting, as I was looking at this here this week and studying some things, one of the things that I ran into in something I was reading on this passage, it made this statement. I thought it was a really, really helpful statement, thinking on this spending time thing, and they said this: hospitality becomes a context for gospel proclamation. The context, the space in which it creates the opportunity to be able to tell them about Christ. Hospitality becomes a context for gospel proclamation. Homes are strategic mission fields. That's good. Is our homes strategic mission fields? Do we see our homes that way? Or is it more our castle? Put up the gate, make sure the moat is full of alligators. That kind of deal? Or is it a mission field? I mean, if we're going to be followers of Jesus, then we must be following his example. And Jesus' example here is pretty straightforward. In fact, this isn't very complicated at all. It's rather simple and straightforward to be able to understand. Seek and save the lost. That was his goal. That was his goal. So he looked for people, saw them not as problems or as obstacles, but as missional opportunities. And then he spent time with them. He spent time with them that they might get to know him. It's not a complicated thing Jesus did. It is very doable. The question is, are we doing it? If not, I'd encourage you to ask yourself, why not? Get into some of those things and then do whatever is necessary to get those obstacles out of the way, that you might engage in partnering with Jesus in this mission that is not just his, but is ours as well, as Matthew 28 clearly tells us, to go into all the world and make disciples. True that. Something for us to be able to think about here this morning as we head into the week together. Reminder, church picnic starts at 1 o'clock. If you're bringing the food stuff with you, maybe show about 1:15 or so we can get that stuff set out. We look forward to that time together. Stand with me, though, if you would. Let me close our time in a word of prayer. God, we do thank you for Jesus, and we thank you for the clarity with which Jesus did life, and we thank you for recording all this that we might be able to see it. There was little ambiguity here as we read through this. There's little ambiguity here concerning Jesus' lifestyle. He was clear as to the reason that he was here, seek and save the lost, and he spent his life doing just that, seeking the lost sinners that are just like me. And then he went to the cross and he suffered and he died for me and for all of us, as all of us are lost, dead in our trespasses and sins, and we are in need of saving. Hence Jesus' mission to seek and to save the lost. God, I know that this is Jesus' heart, and clearly he lived out that mission statement. And so God, I ask that you would help me and all of us who are seeking to follow you. God, I ask that you'd help us to see the simpleness here of what you called us to, in seeing people, truly seeing them, acknowledging and respecting them despite their sin, while inviting them at the same time into our world that they might actually, in time, get to know the Jesus that we serve. God, that's not a complicated thing, really. It's very straightforward. It's pretty simple and straightforward to be able to understand. But God, we acknowledge that it's not easy. It's not easy, not really, because all of us have all sorts of prejudices, all sorts of petty reasons we don't like this person or these types of people or whatever. God, we like these Jews in Luke 19, we all have Zacchaeuses that we have a hard time being around. We have a hard time seeing them as anything but sinners. They aren't us. They have done so much wrong, and they have betrayed us, maybe even victimized us personally, like Zacchaeus had done for those around him. God, it's not easy to see those people as people that you love. It's not easy, Father, to see them as people Jesus came to seek and to save, and yet he did. And I'm grateful that he did. Because if I'm really honest with myself, I am Zacchaeus. So, Father, on behalf of all of us Zacchaeuses here this morning, I say thank you for sending Jesus to die for us. And I ask, Father, that you'd give us Jesus' heart this week, that we might see people as he does, that we might then reach out to them as Jesus does. In Jesus' name, for Jesus' glory in these days, I pray these things. Amen.